rise. Please be seated. So we're just going to wait just a few moments till the appropriate time because we do have people on the live stream, so we want to just make sure they have all the opportunity to join. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to begin the funeral services of Mrs. Rosalie Bertocchi. Cantor Michelle Drucker-Friedman from Emmanuel Congregation will be officiating. We welcome those of you who are joining us online, and for those of you who are here, please take a moment to be sure that your cell phones have been turned off. This time I'm going to invite the family in the first row to please rise as the cantor approaches to perform the ancient ceremony of Kriya, tearing of the ribbon. For those of you online, you won't see this portion. Trust me, it's being done.
When Jacob hears that his son, or believes that his son, has been killed, he rips his clothing to show outwardly the despair and the state of his heart. We do something similar with these ribbons, which show that we are not whole right now. And we never exactly will be the same. Please repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam dayan ha'emet. You may be seated.
Shiviti Adonai l'nei tamid ki mimini b'lemot לכן שמח ליבי ויגל כבודי אף בשרי ישכון לבטח כי לא תעזוב נפשי לשאול, לא תיתן חסכתך לראות שחט. תודי נעמוד במין הנצח. שביתי אדוני לנגדי תמיד, כי ממני ולמות. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My being is secure. For you, God, you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You, God, show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Death has taken our beloved Rosalie. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God. Be with them. For Rosalie's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for her companionship we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of her heart and her mind, which brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voices of our sacred scripture that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. In that vein, inside the packet that you were given is the 23rd Psalm. Please join with me in reading. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He make me to lie down in green pastures. He lead me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guided me in righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointed my head with oil, my cup will over. Surely goodness and mercy follow all the days of my life, and I dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Esainai ehari mehayin yavo Ezri. Ezri mehim Adonai ose shamayim, shamayim. Aretz al yitain lamraglecha al yanum shomrecha. Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yeminaha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach v'layla. I lift up my eyes to the mountain. Where is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel does not slumber or sleep. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon at night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your coming and your going, now and forever. This very old piece is done at the Shabbat table. And although the words are a bit antiquated, they were firmly planted in Rosalie's generation as a way of paying homage to the glue that held a family together. A woman of valor who can find. She is more precious than fine pearls. Her husband trusts in her, and so he lacks nothing. She does him good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hand to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces her future. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her children rise up and bless her. It is a privilege to call upon in this order Mark Salit, Tom Marchetti, Richard Brown, grandson Albert Warner, granddaughter Casey Bertocchi, son Joel Bertocchi, and daughter Susan Bertocchi. Mark.
Good morning, and good morning, Rosalie. I'm Mark Salit. I am a cousin of Rosalie's. Rosalie was a loving force in our family, the Salit family, someone who was filled with life and energy and who co-led her family with Bob. There was a special bond between Rosalie and her cousin Seymour, who's my father. That bond always made it a special event for our families to come together, for us to visit. Rosalie and my father spent a particular moment together that bonded them through the rest of their lives. The night that the news arrived in New York of the death of Rosalie's brother Jackie, my father went right over and spent the night keeping Rosalie company, and took her and they walked all around Manhattan Island. And Rosalie talked about that night and the bond and the love of my father throughout the rest of her life. Every time I was an adult and saw Rosalie, that was the story she would touch on. That human bond, that family tie, and we just heard about the power of family bond, was always tangible. Even when I was little and didn't know anything of it, it spoke to me. And what they did in that was model what the essence of family is. And they modeled it for our generation and the bond we have now. And I hope this cousins bond that we continue keeping live, it's a living thing, is transferring to the next generation. So visiting Auntie Rosie and Uncle Bob was always that special thing, and I was talking in the car over of the little pet cemetery we had. We lived in an apartment building, and there was concrete everywhere, and when our little pets would pass, we would take them in a shoebox out to the back garden by the asparagus, apparently, at the Bertocchi house. And it was just this indulgence of forming this safety and love of what it is to have family. My sister Leslie recounted a time filching flowers from a cemetery next door. And of course, Rosalie knew when Leslie came back with an armload of beautiful flowers that they were filched from a grave. But Rosalie just made Leslie feel okay about that. What beautiful flowers was what Leslie remembers her saying. And my sister Meryl remembers Rosalie's style and the way she represented. The quote was, elegant but natural, artsy and worldly, refined and warm and always approachable and welcoming. And this also I felt, this last one, always interested in you. And that's, again, that richness of being seen as a person when you're a kid is what was modeled for us. Anyway, my little anecdote of Rosalie was I brought my then wife Teresa to Chicago, and Teresa was really bonding with our family, and there was a time we went out. We were at a family event and then went out afterwards because we just wanted to be in each other's company more. I think Teresa and I were staying at Rosalie's and went out for ice cream at Margie's, and it was just this moment of transferring the bond of what it is to be family again to someone else, welcoming someone else in. And I think of nights like that when I think of what it is to be connected. And I think of nights like that when I'm alone and feeling alone, and I forget that we're connected, and I recover from that. And I think of, a man's relationship with his father is complicated, but when I think of my father and Rosalie and the bond they had, all I see is my father's dignity. And Rosalie gave him that, and he gave that back to her as well. I love everybody.
My name is Tom Marchetti. I'm a nephew of Rosalie and Robert when they were here. And it's a pleasure to come here to celebrate a life. On my 10th birthday, my Uncle Robert gave me a Kodak Brownie camera, and with it some advice. Take as many pictures as you like, mark your history, listen to music, all kinds of music, including opera, and always listen to others' opinions, their respect, and respect what they have to say, and then make up your own mind. When I was 14, my Uncle Robert announced to my family that he was going to marry Rosalie Salit in a place called New York City, which I didn't know quite where it was. And would we please attend the ceremony? In October 1955, my family piled into 2 cars. Back then, you could pile as many people into a car as you wanted, and went on to a synagogue in that place, New York City. It was an unforgettable experience for me. I was introduced to a new holy place, a wonderful ceremony, met the bride and the bride's family, and avoided the hors d'oeuvres. They weren't to my taste. Uncle Robert was always my hero, and soon Aunt Rosalie would take her place next to him. Several months later, we had an Italian ceremony for the wedding at my Uncle Jack and Ada's camp in Leverett, Massachusetts. We had a wonderful several days. We welcomed Aunt Rosalie into our family and got to know her much, much better. I didn't get to take much pictures. I took all kinds of pictures at that occasion with that new camera. Since then, Rosalie has become a cherished aunt, a dear friend, and as I matured, she was 10 years older, we often discussed family and life issues. We shared comments, advice, and sometimes we didn't share those thoughts with anyone else. I'm sorry to see Aunt Rosalie leave, grateful that she was with us so long, and will once again be with Uncle Robert for eternity. I will miss her.
morning, folks. I'm Richard Brown, the backyard neighbor of the Bertocchi family when they lived in Hartsdale, New York. And I'm joined here by my brother David and my wife Donna. I'm dearly honored to be able to speak to you this morning and want to thank Susan and Joel for allowing me to say a few words about Mrs. Bertocchi and her wonderful life with us Browns. The Brown family became the Bertocchi's neighbors back in the 1960s. We were actually the first black family in our sort of cul-de-sac neighborhood, and we were blessed to have the Bertocchis as our new neighbors. The Brown and Bertocchi families were intertwined from the start, and a section of the post and rail-style fence that separated our yards was soon removed so we could move freely between the two properties. Through that worn-out path that joined our yards, our families grew together by celebrating holidays, birthdays, and any number of critical life milestones. In fact, the close relationship that developed between my mother, Phyllis Brown, and I hope you're watching, Ma, and Mrs. Bertocchi was so well known in the Greenberg community that it was a featured scene in a community play called My Fair Community. As you know, Mrs. Bertocchi was a great cook, and I spent many days eating her delicious food on special occasions, and on special occasions she would host a pancake feast that me and my three brothers eagerly showed up for with big appetites. And I know that David knows all about this because he usually won the contest. The Bertocchis were included in all our seasonal rituals and we in theirs. Notably, we are frequently guests at the Bertocchis' Passover Seder, which was a particularly funny affair because my brothers and I had these huge Jackson 5 afros, so getting the yarmulkes to stay perched on top of those lofty hairdos was no small feat. Participating at the Bertocchi's Passover Seder was particularly noteworthy because the Brown family, as some in this room know, does have a direct connection to the Jewish faith. Our maternal grandmother was Jewish, whose families migrated from Eastern Europe in 1902 to escape the pogroms. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, her family did not support her marriage to my grandfather, and she was ostracized. Consequently, our family never celebrated any Jewish holidays, and in some ways, Mrs. Bertocchi brought a missing part of our heritage back to us and allowed us to experience a tradition our grandmother Lillian never exposed us to. This was just one example of how our families came together, but there are many other experiences we shared, including us kids watching Dark Shadows, the afternoon soap opera with Barnabas Collins as the main villain vampire. Yet all good things come to an end, and as the story goes, Mr. Bertocchi was transferred by Alan Bradley to the headquarters in Milwaukee, and the Bertocchis left Hartsdale for the Midwest in 1974. I actually traveled with them to help unpack and check out this new neighborhood in Shorewood. However, Joel was determined to finish his senior year at Woodlands High School in Hartsdale, and of course he stayed with us and became one of the brothers. All of this is to say that Mrs. Bertocchi really was a force of nature in my life and my family's life. Her positive energy and nurturing demeanor were a major influence on me, and I have always wondered what might have happened if the Bertocchis stayed in Hartsdale, where my mother still lives, but now faces a tall, imposing wall in her backyard that the neighbors erected. I will always have pleasant and precious memories of visiting the Bertocchis in Milwaukee and Chicago on business trips through the years, or welcoming Mrs. Bertocchi back to Hartsdale when we were blessed to visit her visits back home. I know I speak for my mom and my brothers when I say that Mrs. Bertocchi was like a member of our family who we treasured and will love forever. It saddens me that Mrs. Bertocchi is no longer with us, but I am confident she is in a better place and smiling broadly with the likes of Mr. Bertocchi, my dad, Bill Hansen, Anita and Bob Sternberg, and many others. And I just want to note that this morning I was getting into my car to drive over, and I saw a cardinal on the wire. And then I saw another cardinal fly off with her. So there were two cards fly off, and so I just thought that was an amazing sign. Thank you.
Richard, you really messed me up with that last comment. I want to thank all of you for coming, and those of you who are watching. I'm sure all of you know I am Albert, a grandson to Rosalie. And after I had heard about this happening back in school, I was forced to remember a lot of memories with my grandmother, and I realized something that I never really put together before, and that was how much my grandmother loved the outdoors, but not in the way where you wouldn't find her camping or going in a tent or anywhere near a mosquito. But she loved a cool breeze. If you knew what her most recent condo apartment was, you could see the Baha'i Temple in Evanston all the way to Navy Pier. It was the best 3rd of July fireworks location. Going back to when Harry and I were born, part of the reason that I think I never get sick is she would wrap us up like a good Eastern European woman and walk us through blizzards just to build our immune system. Growing up on the Warren Park Pirates, the Warren Park Warriors, Send Bulldogs, Chicago Knights, those of you who are on those teams know that she was at every game she was physically able to come to. And if the game was being played, then my mom would wrap her up and she'd want to be there in a chair. And I remember her being physically upset if the game was canceled or it was decided that she couldn't come. And I know a lot of you share those moments with her. And what made me smile even more is there was one fall that I was in school, but the Knights still played a fall season, and it was the first time that I wasn't joining them. And just to show you that there was no bias because me and my brother were on the team, neither of us were on the team, but my grandma still went. She still liked being outside. She still liked watching everyone that I grew up with playing baseball. She still loved seeing all of us out there. So I think it's very fitting that she's in this wicker basket because she can still feel the breeze. She's still sitting outside like a picnic basket or like a outdoor patio chair. I'll always remember that. Well, I will now remember that, not as I didn't notice before, but she was the best supporter. She had crazy wit growing up. We thought of it as a grandma burn, but for those of you who knew her as Miss Bertocchi and not grandma, I'm sure got the sharper end of that when she was younger. She was always happy to see people doing things, and she always wanted to see people doing things. And she loved seeing everybody and all of her extended grandchildren being quoted as the neighborhood grandmother. So I thank you all for coming.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey, and I am Rosalie's granddaughter. Thank you all for coming today. My grandmother was around for my entire 18 years of life, but I was only around for 18 of her 91. I know that she lived a long and interesting life before I was born, but I just remember her as my grandma who made me chocolate chip pancakes at sleepovers and let me rifle through her things and try on her jewelry, and who gave me peanut butter pretzels and her blue Subaru. When I was really little, my grandma and Poppy lived in Wisconsin, but they moved to Chicago to be closer to my cousins and I and our respective families. She lived with him in the apartment on Kedzie until he passed away in 2008. She lived with 3 cats as well, first Minnie and then Snowflake and Icicle. Many of my memories of my grandmother are related to things she kept in her apartment, which was very representative of her personality. She read a paper copy of the New York Times every morning to keep her close to her New York roots. She also had lots of paintings hanging around the apartment, many done by my Poppy, and could always tell me about them when I asked. Every article of decor, every article of clothing, everything she had on her wall represented something close to her, and I learned a lot about her by asking about those things. Most of what I know about my family history on my dad's side is because of my grandma. She had a framed certificate above her desk detailing the origin of the Bertocchi last name, as well as numerous files in her apartment about our genealogy. Both our extended and immediate family was always very important to her. She was always telling me news about a distant relative or about one of my first cousins. When I was in 8th grade, she let me interview her for an essay that I wrote about her experience living during World War II. During the interview, she spoke to me about her brother, Jack Salit, who died in the war. She even showed me his Purple Heart medallion, which she kept in a box in her dresser. She was so open and willing to share what must have been such a difficult part of her life with me, but she was able to do it out of love. I will miss my grandmother so much. I will miss sleepovers at her apartment and watching SpongeBob and playing Sorry on the floor and coming over for Hanukkah. But I know that she lived a life full of love for both her friends and her family. I am eternally grateful for the time that we spent together, and I will always remember all of the happy memories that we had.
Good morning, everyone, and again, on behalf of the family, thank you all for coming. It means a great deal that you're here. I'm Joel. I'm Rosalie's son, and the first observation I want to make is that the basket really is beautiful, and it looks like things that we had in our living room my whole time growing up. And, you know, I'm not sure we ever had one that shape, but we had a lot of baskets in our house, so it's very appropriate. I am Rosalie's son, and my sister Susan is Rosalie's daughter, but the speed with which my mother acquired additional sons and daughters and the ease with which she did it over the years was astounding. And she did it in a way that never really bothered me, and I'm sure never really bothered Susan, but all of a sudden, there were more sons and daughters around. Richard recounted how the Browns moved into the neighborhood right behind us in the 60s. I vaguely remember the people who lived in that house beforehand, but then this family with 4 sons moved in, and all of a sudden I had 4 brothers just like that. It was like, and it was seamless. And they were running in and out of our house, and I was running out of their house. And they were eating our food, and I was eating their food. And it just seemed right, because my mother made it that way. Over the years, she has adopted many others, other friends of mine, friends of Susan's, and some, people that I went to college with, who, when they would come through Milwaukee, would stop by and get stuffed full of stuffed shells on their way somewhere. The 2 guys who lived in the dorm room next to me, my mother doesn't know this whole story. They were at Summerfest in Milwaukee, and they got arrested for smoking a joint. They spent the night in jail, and when they were released, they were starving, so they went up to my parents' house and my mom fed them. I don't think they told her why they were still in town, but they got fed. If you showed up, you got fed. It is, that's kind of what she was like, and I know how much all of you, and many of you are in this room, but many are not. Later, colleagues of mine that she met when I became a lawyer and started working, and I know how much she meant, because in the last years when she wasn't able to see as many people, when I would sit with her and I would mention a name, whether it was somebody from the old neighborhood in New York or somebody I'd gone to school with or somebody I'd worked with, she would brighten up and want to know what they were doing, just as perhaps she did when someone mentioned me to her. I don't know. My mother was a delighted grandmother, because as much as she was kind of the mother to many of us in different ways and different amounts over our lives, what she was really preparing for all her life was to be a grandma. And I won't say that Susan and I got pushed aside when the grandchildren came along. It wasn't really like that. We were politely asked to take a step to the right. And the smile that I always saw on her face, for me and Susan, for our friends who got to know her, the smile on her face when I would tell her what one of my friends that she had met was doing, was almost as broad as the smile that she would get when she would see Harry or Al or Casey or Riley. She loved them so much, and it is such a blessing that she lived long enough to be a good grandmother to all of them. My mother reinvented herself many times. It must have been, Tom, I'm really glad that Tom was here to talk about the wedding. Of course, I wasn't there, but I've heard many stories, and the photo album, including pictures of Tom's mother, my favorite Aunt Olga, singing, which I'm really sorry I missed. It shows what a joyous occasion it was, but it must have been an extraordinary thing for my mother, who met my father when she was 23 and he was 36. He was I have to say, a lapsed Catholic, and she was a nice Jewish girl. And for her to bring him home, it must have really been remarkable. Now, my dad told me the secret for how he integrated himself into my mother's Jewish family. He said, I ate everything that was put in front of me. And by gosh, it worked, because by the time I became aware of all of this, he had become, as my Aunt Esther said, I wish all the Goyim were like him. They were a wonderful couple. They were together for, I think, 53 years before my father passed away, after which, and after my mother mourned him, she was then able to exclusively focus on being a grandma, which is really what she wanted to do. I will miss her terribly. But I was inspired by her in so many ways. As I said, she reinvented herself a number of times. She got a master's degree at the University of Wisconsin, go Badgers, in the early 50s. I only learned this recently. She actually got a Fulbright scholarship and was supposed to go to Paris, but in the early 50s, Jewish families, particularly in New York, were not sending kids to Europe yet. So she went to Wisconsin, which some people would say, as I think it was a line in the movie, it's like, like Czechoslovakia or something like that. But she went out there and got a master's degree. After she had kids, when Susan and I were little, she reinvented herself again. She decided she wanted to be a teacher, so she went back to school and got another master's degree at New York University in elementary education and became a school teacher. And she taught basically up until the time my parents moved to Milwaukee. And I believe that one of the ways, the many, many ways she influenced me was, I felt inspired by her to study in college because I watched my mother study to get that master's degree when I was young. And I saw how hard she worked at night, working with her books and working with her notes from her classes. And then they moved to Milwaukee. It was something of a traumatic event for my mom, because if you were born in the Bronx and live in Manhattan, Milwaukee is a very far away place. It is, the relatives on the Salit side, the Jewish side of the family, used to ask if that was where Mary Tyler Moore lived. And it wasn't. But she made the move with my dad because they were a team and they were together and they were going to stay that way, and he needed to go for work. And she reinvented herself again and had another career as I guess it was a paralegal, a legal assistant, whatever it was, working for 2 or 3 different law firms in Milwaukee until she finally retired and they moved to Chicago. All those reinventions, and she was still always the same person who you got that smile from when you got to see her, the same person who wanted to know what was going on with you, what was new, what you were doing, what you had accomplished, so she could celebrate that with you. It never bothered me that I had so many brothers and sisters, not in the least. I was lucky to be the true son, but I welcome and was really thrilled to have all those other brothers and sisters all my life, and I thank my mother for that. I will miss her terribly.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Susan. I'm Rosalie's daughter. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you to the people from out of town who came to join us to speak. I really think it's very interesting. You know, it just sort of all came together that we got people from all different parts of her life. And words I never thought I'd ever say. Thank you to all the people who are joining us via live stream, which is, I hope we're recording this, which is a wonderful way for a lot of her friends. So hello to you all out there. We love you and we feel your presence. I'm really touched, having heard all the speeches, and not too amazed that there is this incredible consistency in the parts of everyone who spoke. And I'm going to be another one who talks about many of the same things that were amazing and precious about my mom. But it is one of those weird things about life that when someone dies, the result is a gathering of so many people that they loved that they would probably have loved to attend. And my mother would have loved to be here with all of us today, to be here with all of you today. There were few things she loved more than being among the people who she loved. And, she was at heart kind of a shy person. So she was really drawn to people who were not shy, like my father. She married the big Italian. She was proposed to before she met him by a very elegant Egyptian Jewish man. But she said, I didn't want to marry him because we were too much alike. And I felt that if I married him, we would have spent our life together at home reading. And so she married my dad, and she did not spend her life at home reading. My father, as those who you knew her, was a big, florid, expressive Italian who loved life and loved people. And she just knew instinctively that he would bring her out into the world in a way that she would not by herself. I used to say that she watched my brother and I like this, because we were both more out in the world than she was. But she loved that, and she knew she needed it. As others have said, I've always believed, though, that the defining moment of my mother's life was losing her brother in the war, World War II. Jack. She is who my brother is named for. And so the first thing she did when she had her first child was to honor him. He was older than her. She was 13, and she adored him. And he was kind and loving towards her. There's lots of pictures of her on a horse and him standing next to her. Her on a, this and him standing next to her. He was a very good brother. One day her parents got a telegram and that was it. He was gone. That's the way it worked. The loss planted in her the belief that anything could happen at any moment, kind of like a sucker punch. She carried and wrestled with that fear through the rest of her life, and no matter how much she tried to not see the world that way, sometimes it was hard, but I think she was committed to cutting it by half and not passing any more of it on to my brother and I than she had to. But there's just no question you can't talk about her or think about her without thinking of how that loss impacted her. Her parents were Russian immigrants. They were devastated. They were really kind of affected, very heavily affected by it. And, nobody took your kid to therapy in those days. It was not like they knew how to get help for themselves or for her. But she had, and we still have, a very large, very close extended family. And they surrounded her and her parents, and they carried them through that tragedy. And she was, as Mark said, her cousin Seymour that night, and she loved them forever for it. That sense of tribe and of family and of loyalty and the belief that you should stick together and care for each other that grew from that loss was very, very powerful. And as she went out in the world, and my brother kind of referenced it extended out first to her college friends like Fran, and then to her coworkers at all kinds of places, but especially where she met my dad, to, of course, my dad, then to other school moms, to her students as a teacher, her fellow teachers, my dad's coworkers, my dad's family, and eventually my friends, Joel's friends, Joel's roommates, so it's so funny that you mentioned them, our beloved spouses, Mark and Julie, our neighbors, our neighbors, not her neighbors, okay, like the people in our neighborhood in Rogers Park. Mark's cooking, which she was particularly fond of. My mother could be difficult, didn't always want to eat. She ate absolutely everything he put in front of her. She ate things she didn't even eat in other environments, but that was his love language, and she loved that. He was very good to my mother, and I will be very grateful for that. But her fellow congregants, her grandchildren, their friends, their teammates, their high school friends, some of whom will carry her out of this building today, their roommates, their girlfriends, her caregiver, her beloved Abby. And that was just the humans, We're not talking dogs yet, And I won't go there. But she was a snob. My mother was a snob. Only wonderful people would do. And chances are, if you're here, unless you happen to be here for Joel or me, you are in one of those categories. Or one I just ran out of. I couldn't keep listing because Shelley would kill me. And a small aside about her grandchildren. Joel, Mark, Julie, and I were definitely much less important once the four of them arrived. I used to joke with her that she was happy to have a daughter, because then for sure, you never know, but you'd get a daughter-in-law, hopefully, but you knew you had a daughter, so someone was having a baby, But Albert, Casey, Harry, Riley, to her, they were perfect. Perfect. Beautiful, brilliant, talented, and very, very precious. Their lives were a continual unfolding of everyday wonder, everything they did. She loved being a grandmother, and she was really good at it. We are so grateful, as my brother said, that she was with us so long, so they will all remember her well, really well. So in the end, she turned that early tragedy into a force of love, generosity, and loyalty. And I hear that from many people, that they felt that from her. She expected a lot from us. She could be tough, and she had pretty high standards, but in turn, you got that awesome reaction when she first saw you. And I thought that was funny that Joel mentioned that too. She put her hands on either side of your face, often, especially if you were male. My mother was not a flirt, but she definitely, loved her boys. And she was lucky. And because to her, you also were beautiful, brilliant, talented, and very precious. Thanks. I love you, Mamala.
As long as we're introducing ourselves, as David said, I'm Cantor Michelle Drucker-Friedman, but to Rosalie, I'm Shalala. I am proud to be one of the many women of my congregation who looked up to Rosalie as not just a mother figure, but a hell of a good friend. So many extraordinary things were said today about an unbelievable human being. But the Talmud warns in Sanhedrin 9:1, however, the one who adds much more than what is needed is not an addition, but a drawback. And so I'm here to simply put a bow on the beautiful story that was Rosalie's life. I was blessed to have loved her too, grateful for the many ways she made my life better with her kindness, humor, and generosity of spirit. When I met with Susan earlier this week, she said so many profound things, but the one that resonated most with me was Rosalie held pain inside her, and yet she brought so much joy. She wasn't perfect, but she was wonderful. Rosalie, thank you for being so many's guiding light. And to the entire Bertocchi clan, thank you for sharing her with us. Susan and I agreed that this poem by Mary Oliver entitled When Death Comes resonated in this moment. When death comes, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility, and I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence, and each body a line of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. You were a bride married to amazement, Rosalie, and it brings comfort that the gift of shalom, of perfect peace, is yours. Our deepest condolences to you, Joel and Susan, Julie and Mark, Al, Harry, Riley, and Casey. May her memory be a blessing to us all. I invite you to rise for the memorial. אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, חמסי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפיך שינה. אם קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע מזהירים, את נשמת חברינו, שחרך לעולמה. בעל הרחמים, יסתיריה בשאת כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור הרים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא הנהלתה, ותנוח בשלום, בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Rosalie Salit Bertocchi, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let Rosalie find refuge in your presence, in the shadow of your wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment will continue at Rand Hill Park Cemetery, 1700 West Arlington Heights Road, Rand Road in Arlington Heights. The family will be together at Emmanuel Congregation today from 6 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., then Monday and Tuesday at Rosalie's residence at 7061 North Kedzie Avenue, Unit 1208 in Chicago. The Shiva coordinator there is Carolyn Heyman. That information is on the service folder. Memorial contributions in Rosalie's memory may be made to Emmanuel Congregation. That information is also on the service folder. And for those of you who are joining us online, all the information can be found on our website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing a car in the back of the procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. Please use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. At this time, I invite the pallbearers to please come forward as we escort the casket of Rosalie Bertocchi from the chapel along with her family and Cantor Michelle Drucker-Friedman. Please rise.